Welcome back to another episode of SmoothBrainEDH, where you get the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. This week we had our patron Alkis on for a really exciting game, so let's see what all of our players brought to the table. Our first player today is Jason on Zimone and Dina. This is a Sultai lands deck, hoping to ramp like crazy and using his commander as a powerful value engine. He keeps a hand with the Snow-Covered Forest, Golgari Rot Farm, Shipwreck Marsh, Verdant Catacombs, Ottawa Soaring City, Nature's Lore, and Tatiova Benthic Druid. Up next is Ethan on Captain Rex Nebula. This is actually a patron submitted deck by our supporter Kelvin. Thank you again, Kelvin, for the list. He brewed up this Boros deck designed to turn random permanents into vehicles to crash into his opponents. Ethan keeps a Mountain, Mana Confluence, Lightning Greaves, Acre Wellspring, Jessica's Will, Ways of Aggression, and Sram Senior Edificer. Third is Matt on Minsc and Timeless Heroes. This is a Gruul Stompy deck, planning to make huge creatures and alpha strike his opponents with a miniature giant space hamster. He starts the game with a Mountain, Stomping Ground, Mosswort Bridge, Sword of Hearth and Home, The Great Hinge, Curse of Opulence, and Wood Elves. Last up is our patron, Alkis, on Ovika, Enigma Goliath. This is a deck as Goblin Trial, hoping to flood the board with tokens to overwhelm his opponents. He starts the game with Evolving Wilds, Frostboil Snarl, Mindstone, Idol of Oblivion, Brazen Cannonade, Aetherize, and Empty the Warrens. We're about to hop right into the game. Before that, go and give us a like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. We post new gameplay videos every week, so you won't miss any of it. Big shout out to Alkis again and all of our patrons. We really appreciate all the support. Link to our Patreon is in the description, as well as links to the deck lists, our social media, our podcast channel, and our public Discord server. Our channel is partnered with Dragon Shield, so if you'd like to pick up any new sleeves or magic-related products, check out our affiliate link in the description. We also partner with Inked Gaming, so if you're looking to make any custom playmats, use our affiliate link in the description as well. Now, on to the gameplay.
Looks like Matt wins the die roll, and he'll start off with Mosswort Bridge, and he'll hide away a card, then pass to Alkis, who plays Evolving Wilds, and he'll immediately crack it for an island, and then he passes the turn to Jason. Jason plays Opulent Palace and passes to Ethan, who joins the Tapland Club with a Sundown Pass, and then we're back to Matt's turn. Matt plays a Mountain, and then we'll cast Talisman of Impulse. He'll then tap it for a red, forgetting to take the damage, and he'll cast Curse of Opulence on Jason. The turn is then passed to Alkis, who will play his Snarl, and he reveals a Mountain, so it enters untapped. Then he'll tap for 2 and cast Mindstone, then pass to Jason. Jason plays his Snow Forest, and then he'll tap for 2 to cast Nature's Lore. He finds Zaggoth Triumph to the battlefield tapped, and passes to Ethan while he searches for it. Ethan plays a Mountain, and then we'll cast Acre Wellspring, drawing a card upon entering the battlefield, and then he'll pass to Matt. Matt plays Inkmoth Nexus, and then he'll tap for 3 to cast Wood Elves. He finds Taiga with it, and then he'll pass to Alkis. And Alkis plays Mountain, then casts Idol of Oblivion, and then passes to Jason, who will play Verdant Catacombs, and then he'll tap for 3 and cast his commander, Zimone and Dina, and then he passes to Ethan. And Ethan will play Mana Confluence as land for turn, then he'll tap for 3 and cast Captain Rex Nebula. He'll then move to combat and turn his Acre Wellspring into a 2/2 vehicle. He'll then crew it with Captain Rex Nebula, and then move to combat and swing it at Jason. Curse of Opulence will trigger, so Ethan and Matt will both make a gold token, and then Jason will block with his commander, killing the Acre Wellspring. So Ethan gets a card and a gold out of this. And since the vehicle was dealt damage, Ethan rolls to see if he can roll a 2 to deal 2 damage to any target. He rolls a 5 though, so he does not. The turn is then passed to Matt, who will immediately cast his commander, Minsc and when Minsc enters the battlefield, Matt gets a 1/1 hamster token, and he'll immediately uptick his walker to put 3 counters on his hamster, and then he moves to combat and swings for 4 at Jason, who takes the damage, and Matt gets another gold token. The turn is then passed to Alkis, who casts a very sad Empty the Warrens. It'll make him 2/1/1 goblins, and then he'll activate Idol of Oblivion to draw a card. He'll then play Shiv and Reef as land for turn, and then he passes to Jason, who stops on end step to crack his Verdant Catacombs, and he finds a Dryad Arbor to the battlefield. Then on his turn, he'll play Shipwreck Marsh as land for turn, then he taps for 5 to cast the better Tatiova. The turn is then passed to Ethan. He'll start off with a Mountain. He'll then cast Sram Senior Edificer, and then he'll cast a Lightning Greaves, which triggers the Sram. Rex Nebula is then fitted with his new kicks. Then Ethan will move to combat and swing for 2 at Minsc and Matt will block with Wood Elves. And then Ethan passes the turn to Matt, who starts off with a Snow Forest. Then he'll cast Sword of Forge and Frontier. Minsc is then ticked up, and the hamster gets 3 more counters, and then the sword is equipped to the hamster. Matt will then move to combat, and he'll swing his 9/9 hamster at Alkis, who can't block it. Upon connecting, Matt will exile a Craterhoof Behemoth and Return of the Wild Speaker. Unfortunately, even with his second land drop, which is an untapped Stomping Ground, He can't cast either of those, so they are permanently exiled. He will, however, cast a Great Hinge for only 2 mana post-combat. The turn is then passed to Alkis, who will immediately tap for 5 and cast Kindred Discovery. He'll then move to combat and swing a goblin at Jason and a goblin at Minsc and Boo. There are 3 attack triggers, 2 draws, and 1 Curse of Opulence trigger. Matt can't block, and Jason will block with his commander. And then, since he made a gold token, Alkis will activate Idol of Oblivion to draw another card. Then he'll play Guildless Commons as land for turn, bouncing his mountain to his hand. He'll then pass the turn, and on end step, Jason will activate Zimone and Dina to sacrifice his Dryad Arbor to draw a card and then put a breeding pool onto the battlefield tapped. This triggers Tatiova, gaining him a life and drawing him a card. Then Zimone and Dina will trigger for him drawing his second card, and he'll drain Matt for 2. Then, after end step, comes cleanup, and Alkis will discard the mountain he bounced, and then the turn is passed to Jason, who will immediately tap for 2 and cast Bloodghast. Also immediately, it's sacrificed to Zimone and Dina to draw a card, and then he'll put a Snow Swamp to the battlefield tapped, and then he'll drain Ethan for 2. And then the Snow Swamp entering will trigger both Tatiova and the Bloodghast. He'll then play Command Tower as land for turn and miss a Tatiova trigger. He'll then tap for 3 and cast the new Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, and he'll uptick it to untap his commander. After this, he'll move to combat and hit Minsc and Boo with Tatiova, putting him down to 1, and then he'll pass the turn to Ethan. Ethan starts off with an Arid Mesa that he immediately fetches with for a basic Plains. Then he'll cast Jeska's Will, targeting Alkis, who has 7 cards in hand. So he'll make 7 red mana and then exile a Mountain, Anger of the Gods, and a Spire of Industry. He'll then cast a Boros Signet, and then Comet, Stellar Pup. And then he'll activate Comet, and he rolls a 5, meaning he'll get to do 5 damage to any creature or player, and then go down 2 loyalty counters. And so he targets Zimone and Dina, and actually technically it doesn't target, and since this is the resolution of the same ability, there is no chance for Jason to respond here, so Zimone and Dina will just die. After this, Ethan will cast Fleet Wheel Cruiser, which will trigger Shrom, and then when it enters the battlefield, it'll become a creature till end of turn. He'll then move to combat, and he'll turn Comet into a vehicle. But he doesn't have haste, so he'll just swing with his cruiser at Minsc, killing him. Ethan will then pass the turn, but on end step, Matt will gain 2 life by tapping the Great Hinge. Then, on his turn, he'll start off by animating Inkmoth Nexus, and this gets him to a total of 10 power on the board, so you know what this means. He'll also activate his Mosswort Bridge. And the card underneath is Yadora, Grave Gardener. Hens trigger, then Matt moves to combat and swings an Infect at Jason, and a giant hamster at Tyvar, and they both connect. This also triggers Curse of Opulence, which allows Matt to cast Rishkar's Expertise post-combat, and he'll draw a total of 9 cards, and cast Mana Gorger Hydra for free. Hens trigger, then he'll play a mountain as land for turn, and then pass the turn to Alkis. And he discards 2 forests, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, and Leyline Tyrant on his cleanup. Now on Alkis' turn, he'll play Sulphur Falls. And then he'll tap for 7 mana and cast Ovika. Then with his last mana, he'll tap it for a red and cast Infernal Plunge, sacrificing his goblin. This will trigger Ovika, which gets him a goblin, which draws him a card, and then he'll get 3 red mana. With the token being made, he'll activate Idol of Oblivion to draw a card. And with that 3 red mana, he'll cast Goblin Assault, which gets him 3 more Phyrexian Goblins, and will draw him 3 more cards. He'll then move to combat, and since Jason is the only one without blockers, Alkis will swing for 4 at him with his 4 goblins, and because of this, he'll draw 4 more cards, and Jason will take 4. Curse of Opulence will also trigger. Alkis will then pass the turn, and on cleanup, he'll discard 3 lands, Reconnaissance Mission, Brazen Cannonade, a Signet, and Aether Spouts. Now on Jason's turn, he'll start off with a Misty Rainforest, which he will immediately fetch for a snow-covered island. This will gain him 2 life and draw him 2 cards. Then he'll move to combat and swing at Comet with his Bloodghast, which Ethan will block with Shrom. And then he'll pass the turn to Ethan, who will play the OG Aganjo, which he says would have been awesome to have last turn. Ethan will then activate Comet, and he rolls another 5, so he gets to deal 3 damage to something, and then tick down Comet by 2. Now the only creature he can kill is Jason's Tatiova, but he says that would be really rude. But Matt brings up that he thinks that Jason is holding onto a Cyclonic Rift right now, and if Jason's going to wipe everyone else's board, he might as well be on the same playing field. And ultimately, after a lot of discussion at the table, Ethan agrees with this, so he'll point the 3 damage at Tatiova, and she'll die. Ethan will then cast Alibu, Ancient Witness, and then he'll equip the Lightning Greaves to it. After this, he'll use Rex Nebula to crew the cruiser, then he'll move to combat, turn Comet into a 4/4 vehicle, and crew Comet with Alibu. He'll then attack Alkis with the cruiser, and then Matt with Comet. Alibu will then trigger, and he'll do 4 damage to Matt's face and scry 4. There are no blocks around the table, so Matt takes 4, and Alkis takes 5, And then Rex's ability will trigger on Comet, and Ethan rolls a 6, so nothing happens. The turn is then passed to Matt, and he'll start off with a basic forest. Then he'll put Atali Primal Conqueror onto the stack, and when it resolves, he'll draw a card and put a counter on it from Great Henge first, and then he'll get a Birds of Paradise from himself, a Commander's Sphere from Alkis, Mortality Spear from Jason, and Gamble from Ethan, and he'll cast them all. The Birds of Paradise will trigger Great Henge, the Mortality Spear will blow up the Kindred Discovery, Gamble will tutor him a Gaia's Cradle, which he unfortunately discards. After this, he'll tap for 3, taking one from his talisman, and he'll cast Tribute to the World Tree. After this, he'll move to combat, and he'll swing Eudora at Alkis, his Hamster at Jason, and then Managorger Hydra at Ethan. But before we even get to blocks, Jason will cast and overload Cyclonic Rift. And it resolves. And with only one colorless land untapped, Matt has to pass the turn and discard a lot of cards. And I'm just going to let him tell you them.
Farseek, a Sword of Fortune Frontier, Eudora, Atali, a Pathbreaker Ibex, Rada Eridiceld, and a Blasphemous Act.
And now the turn is passed to Alkis, and he'll start off with a basic mountain. Then he'll recast his Mind Stone, and then he'll tap for 3 and cast Decanter of Endless Water, which is very good after a Cyclonic Rift. Then after this, he'll tap out and cast Goblin Trashmaster, and then he passes the turn to Jason. Jason will stop on Instep though to Thought Scour, targeting himself, and he'll mill a land in crop rotation, and then draw a card. After this, he'll move to his turn and recast Zimone and Dina, and then he'll tap for 3 and cast Scoot Swarm. After this, he'll play Exotic Orchard, and Scoot Swarm will copy itself. He then says Bloodghast comes back, but forgets to actually grab him out of the graveyard, but he realizes this later and corrects it. The turn is then passed to Ethan, who starts off with a basic Plains, and then he'll recast Comet, Stellar Pup, and he'll activate Comet. And this time he rolls a 4, meaning he gets to deal 5 damage to something and go down to Loyalty again. Poor Jason gets targeted again, and Zimone and Dina take that 5 damage. Ethan will then cast Boros Signet into Lightning Greaves, and then he'll pass the turn to Matt. Matt starts off with Balaged Recovery, and he returns Gaia's Cradle back to his hand, and then he plays it as land for turn. He'll then drop his Birds of Paradise, a Taurian Mauler, and then Tribute to the World Tree now that Gaia's Cradle can tap for 2 green. And then the turn is passed to Alkis, and he'll start off with a Cascade Bluffs, and then he'll tap for 7 to recast his Commander. Then, after this, he'll tap for 2 and cast Idol of Oblivion, which will trigger his commander, making 2 goblins. And then, of course, he'll activate the idol to draw a card. Then, with his last mana, he'll cast Quest for the Goblin Lord, which gets him 1 more goblin. Alkis will then move to combat, and he'll swing for 3 with his Trashmaster at Jason, knowing that Jason won't block because Jason really wants to kill Comet. He'll then pass the turn, and Alkis was 100% correct. Jason will immediately move to combat and swing for 4 at Comet, and Ethan has no responses. Then after this, Jason casts my favorite 7-mana draw a card spell, Nexus of Fate. Before he moves to his next turn though, he will play Golgari Rot Farm, bouncing Snow Island to his hand, and this will get him 2 more Scoot Swarms, and then he'll move to his next turn. And on that extra turn, he'll just immediately cast Zimone and Dina again. After this, he'll play his Snow Island again, which will double his Scoot Swarm count again. He'll then move to combat and swing for 6 at Ethan, who has no blockers. And then he'll pass the turn. And Ethan decides to just tap for 7 and cast Necron Monolith, and then pass the turn to Matt. And Matt starts off with a basic mountain. Then he'll cast Goreclaw, Tribute Trigger, then Bloated Contaminator for only 1 mana, another draw off tribute. Then he casts Guardian Project, and then Toski Bearer of Secrets, which will draw him a card and enter with 2+1/+1 counters. Matt then moves to combat and is about to swing his Taurian Mauler at Ethan, but Ethan threatens the Swords to Plowshares, so Matt will decide to hold back and pass to Alkis, who will start off with an expressive iteration. He gets a look at the top 3 cards of his library, puts 1 to hand, 1 to the bottom of library, and then he'll exile Sol Ring and he can play it this turn. He also gets 2 more goblins from his commander and 2 quest counters on his quest. He'll then cast the Sol Ring, getting 1 more goblin and 1 more quest counter, and then he'll activate Idol of Oblivion to draw a card. He'll then cast Military Intelligence, getting 2 more goblins and 2 more quest counters. He'll then cast Battle Hymn, which gets him another 2 goblins, and he decides to stop putting quest counters on his quest for the Goblin Lord because he's already got enough. And when the hymn resolves, he gets 12 red mana. He'll then cast Invasion of Kaldheim, attached to Ethan, allowing him to exile all the cards in his hand and then draw that many, and then he can play the exiled cards till the end of his next turn. So he'll exile those 4 cards, and then he'll draw 4. Then for only 4 mana, he'll cast Into the Story, but he still gets the 7 goblins. Then he draws 4 cards. Alkus will then ask how many cards everybody has in hand, and then he'll cast Jeska's Will, targeting Ethan, who has 5 cards in hand, and Alkus will choose both modes. He'll get 3 more goblins, and then Ethan will respond to the Jeska's Will by casting Swords to Plowshares, targeting Goblin Trashmaster. Alkus responds to this by sacrificing 2 goblins to his Trashmaster to blow up Ethan's Signet and Lightning Greaves, and then the Swords to Plowshares will resolve. Then the Jeska's Will resolves, and 4 red mana is made, and then Arcane Signet, the Phasing of Zhalfir, and an island are exiled. After this, he'll cast Mana Geyser, which will get him 5 goblins and 22 red mana. Then, after this, he'll use 7 mana to cast Sunbird's Invocation. This was exiled from his invasion of Kaldheim, and it makes him 7 more goblins. And just to remind you guys, thanks to Quest for the Goblin Lord, these are 3/1s now. And then after this, for 8 mana, he'll cast City on Fire, making him 8 more goblins. And now all of his 3/1s that have haste deal triple damage. And Sunbird's Invocation will trigger, and he finds Perforos, God of the Forge, off this. With that City on Fire on the field, Perforos deals 6 damage every time a creature enters the battlefield. Alkus will then cast Fiery Emancipation, and this will trigger Sunbird's Invocation and his commander. This will put 6 goblins on the field, and Perforos will then trigger 6 times, dealing 36 damage to all of his opponents. So yeah, they're just dead. They're super dead, and Alkus wins. Way to go, man. Well, everyone, there you have it. Today we were playing 2 Patreon decks, and one of them was even played by the patron. And he won. And quite elaborately, too. That last turn from Ovika was amazing. But I'm happy to say everyone else got to do some fun stuff, too. Unfortunately, that dog comet picked off everything in Jason's board, but he was able to get his revenge on the Stellar Pup. Let us know what you guys thought down in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You can also check out all of our links in the description. If you're interested in submitting one of your decks to us, consider becoming a patron. You can find that link down in the description too. You can also find deck lists and really anything you could ever want from us. But that's all from me, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. You all have a smooth day.